God's chosen ones, why your eyes start to change. And it's not just physical. Eleanor had never questioned her eyesight. Not really. She read charts at the hospital, drove at night, never needed glasses. But lately, something had shifted. She stood in front of the mirror that morning, just like always, but this time was different. The light from the window poured in, not harsh, not soft, but alive. The edges of the world shimmered. Her own reflection didn't feel like hers anymore. Her eyes, they didn't look broken, they looked ancient, knowing. She blinked hard, rubbed them. "Maybe I'm just tired," she whispered. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about exhaustion. It wasn't medical. It was spiritual. Because suddenly light didn't just illuminate, it spoke. Faces didn't just smile, they echoed. And for the first time in her life, Elena felt like she wasn't just seeing the world, she was seeing through it. She wasn't going blind, she was waking up. And if you've ever felt it too, that shift in your sight, that ache of recognition in someone's glance, then maybe your eyes are changing too. Not because something's wrong, but because heaven has decided you're ready to see. Elena didn't remember when it started. Maybe it was gradual, like morning fog that quietly lifts before you realized you'd been walking in it. All she knew was something changed. She began noticing strange things. Light felt different, like it carried emotion. Some days the sun made her feel calm. Other days it pressed on her chest like a weight. And colors. They were too loud, too alive. She stared at her son's red backpack one morning and felt herself choking up, and couldn't explain why. Then came the flickers, small, at the edge of her vision, like someone just ducked around the corner. But no one was there. She told herself it was stress. She was a nurse after all, long hours, low sleep, but the more she ignored it, the louder it became. It was in the grocery store, in the frozen aisle, that she saw it fully for the first time. A woman passed her. Their eyes locked, and in a split second, Elena felt everything. Grief, fear, a fracture too old to name. The woman smiled, but her eyes, they betrayed a scream. And in that moment, Elena saw it. Mask over a soul. She dropped her basket and walked out. Something inside her shook. Something holy. Something terrifying. The next day she went to the doctor. Vision test. Retinal scan. Everything normal. "Elena," the doctor smiled, "you have perfect eyesight." She left more confused than before. Because nothing looked perfect. Everything looked transparent. Too real. Or not real at all. That night she sat alone in her apartment, lights off. She stared out the window at the moon and whispered, "God, what's happening to me?" And somewhere in the silence, not from outside, but from deep within, came the answer. You're not losing your sight. You're being given new eyes. Eyes that don't just read light, they read truth. Eyes that don't just see what's visible, but reveal what's spiritual. And if you felt it too, the flickers, the tension, the sudden awareness of masks and meaning, an invisible weight, then this isn't just Eleanor's story. It's yours too, because the world hasn't changed. Part 1. The Divine Wound. What your eyes saw too much and no one believed you. She was 9 the first time it happened, late October. The trees outside her bedroom glowed orange, and her grandfather had just come home from the hospital. He was dying. Everyone knew it, but no one said it. Elena sat at the foot of his bed, swinging her legs, clutching the little green notebook he gave her when she was 6. She used it to draw things she couldn't say, colors that didn't have names, shapes that moved like emotions. And then, without warning, she saw it. A soft golden light around his body, like mist, but alive. She stared, blinked, rubbed her eyes, still there. "Papa," she whispered, "are you glowing?" He smiled, not surprised, almost relieved. "I wondered when you'd start seeing," he whispered. "It runs in our blood." But when she told her mother what she saw, everything changed. "Elena, stop it," her mother snapped. "That's not real. Don't say things like that." She tried to explain how the light wasn't scary. It was peaceful, beautiful. But her mother's face grew pale, eyes narrowed. "You're too old for imaginary things. Go wash up." That night, Elena cried into her pillow. Not because she'd done something wrong, but because something inside her had been seen, and then silenced. From then on, she stopped speaking about the things she saw. She stopped drawing the colors. She stopped trusting the part of her that knew. And so began the wound. Not the wound of pain, but the wound of being unrecognized. The wound of seeing something sacred and being told it didn't exist. Years passed. She got good at not seeing, good at fitting in, good at acting normal. But the ache never left, a subtle, silent ache, the kind of ache you carry in your bones, the kind heaven doesn't let you forget. Because when God marks your eyes for sight, the world may try to shut them, but spirit will keep them burning. In this part, the divine wound is not physical. It's the invisible fracture of spiritual identity when the gift of sight is buried under shame. Part 2, the silent hurt. You see everything, but no one sees you. Years passed. Elena grew up. The colors faded. The drawings stopped. She traded visions for schedules, notebooks for spreadsheets, prayer for productivity. But the eyes never stopped seeing. She just learnt how to pretend they didn't. The 39, Elena, worked nights in a trauma ward, a place where people bled, wept, begged, and sometimes died without warning. It wasn't the death that wore her down. It was the truth behind the faces. One night, a man came in, overdosed, cold, still, gone. They called it. Time of death, 2:14, ILEMing. But as she stood over him, removing the IV, something shimmered. Not light, not shadow, just presence. She saw it again, the faint glow around his body, rising like breath. And then the sobbing began. But not from the room, not from a voice, from his energy. She staggered back. His mouth was still, but his spirit was weeping loudly. Elena didn't say a word. She couldn't. Who would believe her? So she went to the chapel. Empty, cold, the kind of silence that feels crowded. She sank to the floor and pressed her forehead to the pew. "God," she whispered, "why do I feel everything? Why do I see what no one else seems to?" No answer. Just that familiar ache. That same ache from when she was 9, but now grown up, heavier, more silent. Because the world had taught her, don't speak about it, don't trust what you feel. Smile, function, fit in. But deep inside, she was suffocating. Because you can only deny what you see for so long before the gift becomes a burden. She started wearing sunglasses indoors, not for fashion, for defense. The lights in the hospital felt aggressive. Some faces drained her just by looking at them. Others lit her up, made her dizzy with love, sorrow, or knowing. It was exhausting, and yet no one saw it. No one saw her. They saw the nurse, the capable one, the calm one, No one saw the soul behind the eyes. No one saw the fight, the silent warfare, the spiritual weight, the fatigue of seeing beyond the veil and having no one to talk to about it. So she stayed quiet, she performed, she survived. But inside her spirit trembled, because once your soul has been touched by heaven's sight, no job, no routine, no small talk can ever distract you from the ache of the unseen. This is the burden stage of spiritual awakening. When you carry sight in a world that refuses to acknowledge spirit, when your soul reads truth, but your life requires silence. Part 3. The hidden scene, where a stranger confirms what your spirit always knew. It happened at the grocery store. Nothing dramatic, no thunder, no flash of prophecy. Just a Tuesday evening and a list of frozen dinners she didn't want to cook. Eleanor stood in aisle 6, staring blankly at a row of canned soup, when she felt it again, that pressure at the edges of her vision. A flicker, like someone just walked past her peripheral field, but no one was there. She blinked, rubbed her temples, shook it off. Again, she reached for a can, and that's when she saw him. A little boy, maybe 5, standing across the aisle, just staring, eyes wide, still, like he'd seen a ghost or an angel, their eyes locked. And then, without breaking gaze, he whispered to his mother, "Mummy, she glows." Elena froze. His mum looked down, distracted. "Come on, sweetie." But the boy didn't move. He just smiled. "She's shining, Mummy." Elena's chest tightened. The mother gave an awkward chuckle. Kids and their imagination. But Elena couldn't move, because in one sentence, from a child who didn't know her name, her story, or her wound, heaven had spoken. "You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're luminous." Her hand trembled as she placed the soup back on the shelf. Not because she was scared, but because something ancient had been remembered in that moment. She left her cart in the aisle and walked outside. It was golden hour. The sun was setting low, and everything looked different. The trees weren't just trees. They shimmered. The wind didn't just blow, it spoke. The sidewalk felt alive, and suddenly she wasn't questioning herself anymore. She knew. It started again. The awakening, the real one, the one she buried at 9, the one she hid behind professionalism, behind scrubs and forced smiles. But now the veil was tearing, the light was returning, and it wasn't just in what she saw, it was in how she was seen. Child, untouched by programming, unafraid of the supernatural, had recognized her. Not for her uniform, not for her title, but for her essence. "You glow." That wasn't poetry. It was prophecy. This is the turning point. A hidden sign becomes a divine whisper. You haven't lost your sight, you've simply begun to use it. Part 4. The soul hook. You don't just see through faces, you see through spirits. The next night, Eleanor stood in the hospital elevator, staring at her own reflection in the mirrored doors. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Not in a frightening way. Her eyes weren't darker, they were deeper, not tired, but ancient, as if they remembered something her mouth couldn't say. When the doors opened, she walked to the chapel again, empty, quiet. But this time she wasn't just seeking comfort. She was seeking clarity. Pastor Rubin was already there, sitting in the back row like he always did after midnight. No sermon, no small talk, just stillness. She sat beside him. "I think something's wrong with me," she said quietly. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even look at her. He just exhaled. "You're seeing again," he said. "Aren't you?" Elena nodded. Her voice trembled. "Well, I look at people, and it's like I'm reading their soul before they even speak." Reuben finally turned to her, eyes soft. "That's not insanity. That's inheritance." Her lips quivered. "Then why does it feel like a curse?" He nodded slowly. "Because spiritual sight comes with spiritual weight. You're not just perceiving energy, Elena. You're interpreting alignment. That's warfare." She didn't speak, just cried, quietly, because for the first time, someone didn't dismiss her pain. He named it. The days that followed unraveled her. She'd sit in meetings and suddenly feel people's anxiety clawing through their smiles. Someone would say, "I'm fine," and she'd hear grief underneath it. One woman laughed at lunch, and Elena felt the hollowness beneath the sound. Her eyes didn't see performance anymore. They saw presence, or the lack of it. She started noticing the fracture, the crack between what people said and what they were carrying. She couldn't explain it. She just knew when someone was lying. She felt the hidden grief behind a compliment. She discerned when love was real and when it was manipulation dressed in kindness. And it wasn't just draining, it was dangerous, because she could no longer pretend she didn't see. She couldn't fake normal conversations. She couldn't ignore when a room felt heavy with hidden darkness. Her eyes became instruments, antennas, and every environment became a reading, a decoding of energy, intention, truth. One evening, she walked past the ICU. A man looked up from his hospital bed and locked eyes with her. And for a moment, everything in her froze, because what she saw in his gaze wasn't human. It was something else, something old, something dark. But beneath it was fear, shame, a child buried in pain. She didn't flinch, she didn't run. She stood there, and she prayed, silently, steadily, because this wasn't just vision anymore. It was ministry. She wasn't seeing people. She was seeing through them, into the realm that shaped them. She hadn't been given these eyes to judge. She'd been given them to intercede. The point where spiritual awakening is no longer about identity, but assignment. You see what others can't, not to feel special, but because someone has to see what hell is hiding. Part 5. The Divine Redirect. You thought you were breaking down, but you were breaking open. It was early morning when Elena stepped outside. She hadn't slept. Not because she couldn't, but because her spirit was awake in a way her body had never known. She walked without purpose, past houses, past quiet streets, into a field behind the chapel where the world hadn't yet caught up. And as the sky began to pinken with light, something inside her began to settle. The fear lifted, the confusion cleared, and what remained was stillness. She sat under an old tree, closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't ask God to take it away. She whispered, "Show me what it's for." What happened next wasn't a vision. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory, one she had never made. A glimpse of herself years from now, older, wiser, sitting with someone on a hospital bench, holding their hand as they wept. Not speaking, just seeing them, truly without judgment, without fixing. And in that moment, they exhaled, like a chain had broken inside them. And Elena understood. Her eyes weren't made to fix people. They were made to free them. As she opened her eyes beneath that tree, something shifted in the air. She didn't hear God's voice out loud, but she felt it in her chest, deep, clear, undeniable. Your sight is sacred. You were never meant to carry it in silence. You were meant to carry it into shadows and shine. Suddenly, the memories of her past weren't wounds. They were blueprints. The strange light around her grandfather, a gift. The boy in the grocery store, a confirmation. The man in the ICU, an assignment. Every flicker, every blur, every moment she felt too much or saw too far. It wasn't overload. It was orientation. Heaven hadn't broken her. Heaven had rerouted her. That afternoon, she returned to the hospital, not as the version of herself who had once begged to unsee, but as the woman who had learned to carry sight with reverence. She began to speak slowly with patience, look them in the eyes, not just medically, but spiritually. She began to write down their names in a small prayer book, one by one, not to impress God, but to honor the way He saw them through her. And something started happening. People began to soften around her, weep, smile, confess. The chaplain said, "You have this strange peace around you." The doctors said, "People open up to you more than anyone else." But she didn't explain it, because it couldn't be explained, only lived. My eyes are not the same, and I wouldn't trade them back for anything. I don't see with judgment. I see with presence, a sea with heaven. And it's enough. The sacred twist where what once felt like a burden becomes a blueprint. Where the gift that isolated you becomes the tool that awakens others. You weren't sent to be normal. You were sent to be luminous, the sacred whisper. Once you've seen with spirit, you can never unsee. Elena no longer feared the shimmer in the light. She no longer doubted the flickers at the edge of her sight. She shrank from faces that felt fractured. She didn't flinch when the energy in the room changed. She simply breathed and watched with heaven's eyes. She had been taught to dismiss it, trained to call it imagination, scared into silence. But now she knew. She hadn't been going crazy. She had been activated. Some mornings she still cried, not from confusion, but from gratitude, because she realized the very thing that once made her feel alone was the same thing that now made her useful. She sees, she feels, she discerns, she frees. To those watching, if your eyes have been changing too, if light feels alive, if you can sense people's intentions without words, if your vision drifts when the energy shifts, if your body rejects what your soul no longer resonates with, then hear this. Your eyes are no longer just biological tools. They are prophetic instruments. They've been recalibrated for spiritual discernment. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. The world doesn't need more people who see with logic. It needs those who see with love, with fire, with truth. This is not a breakdown. It's your breakthrough. What if the very thing you were hiding, the strange way you see, feel, sense, was actually the evidence that heaven chose you long before you knew how to carry it? And if it were you, would you have the holiness to stay silent when heaven says, "Don't speak, just see"? If this story awakened something in you, if your eyes have been shifting, if your spirit has been whispering, if your sensitivity has been mistaken for weakness, then you are not alone. You are not broken. You are chosen. Comment below, "I see with spirit." Let the algorithm become a sanctuary for others like you. Share this video with someone who feels unseen. It may be the confirmation they've been praying for. And if you feel this mission matters, subscribe, because the next story won't just go deeper. It may be the moment your calling becomes clear. We're building something sacred here, not an audience, a remnant, a family, of those whose eyes have been marked by heaven.